Hello and welcome to another episode of Kirkin Out. Whether you're watching or listening, I truly appreciate you checking out the podcast however you find me. This week's episode features Katie Gilhooly of WLIO-TV in Lima, Ohio. That's not too far south of my old stomping grounds of Toledo. You know, we talk some college football with the Big Ten season about to kick off, along with high school sports during the pandemic. Ohio has actually been playing high school football. They're currently in the playoffs, so it's interesting to see what life has been like for Katie covering local sports during the pandemic. But first things first, whenever I think Ohio, my time spent there, a lot of it involves the weather, right? It can get pretty cold and windy as things approach the fall and the winter. So that's my first question to Katie is just how cold are things right now?
Yeah, yesterday was a really good representation of a day here in Ohio. I actually had to wake up at like 5:15 yesterday morning after doing Friday night football to head to Columbus for state golf. And when I got up, it was, I think, 33 degrees. So I had all my layers on because I knew I was going to be on a golf course for much of the early part of the day. But by 1 p.m., 2 o'clock, I was shedding layers. But on my way home from Columbus, we have Saturday night playoff football games going on right now. On my way home from Columbus, I made a stop at a couple of football games that we had going on, and I had to put the layers and the gloves back on. So in this business, I keep a lot of clothes in various places because I think my Alabama blood's just really thin. But I always want to make sure I have gloves and hot hands and all sorts of stuff because I never know. I feel like 40 can feel different on different days around here because there's so much wind because everything's so flat. I don't ever remember growing up in Alabama and like it ever being as windy as it is here. So dealing with like the wind chill, I guess, is the hardest part. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of it. Like when it starts snowing, I'm going to complain over and over again. And I'm like, we're just going to get mad, but I really hate it so much. But I love the people here and love what I do, so it makes it a little bit better, I guess.
Yeah. Ohio's an interesting place. I know I didn't really exactly know too much about it before I moved there. And you kind of rolled into my next question, which would be just a little bit of an introduction about yourself. You mentioned Alabama. I first met you in Alabama. So what's it like growing up in Alabama in a very different climate? And then of course now you're in Ohio, but expand a little bit. You know, sports broadcasting is something that you're into. How did this kind of love come about? So tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you're from and how you got to this point here in Lima.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Alabama and stayed there for most of my early life. Raised in Decatur, Alabama, which is in North Alabama, not too far from Huntsville, which is a TV market. And went to the University of Alabama. So I lived in Tuscaloosa for 4 years, graduated from Alabama, and then wanted to kind of get into the TV business, which I feel like came about because growing up, I'm an only child. And so my dad is a huge like sports guy. I always say when you ask him about his life, he uses a timeline based on what was like going on in sports that year. He can like remember, oh, well, so-and-so in the World Series that year. So, I was doing this or that. So I think because just by proxy, because that was what my dad was doing all the time, I like to, watch college football with him or whatnot. It just kind of became something that I really loved. But I also, while playing sports growing up, I also was really involved in theater. So I feel like what I do now kind of puts my love of sports and kind of the performance aspect, sort of, if that's how you want to say it, together. And it's like really cool that, I kind of get to use my love of both things in what I do every day. But after I graduated from Alabama, I sent out like 200 and something resume tapes. And I actually ended up taking a job in news in Kirksville, Missouri, which is market, like, I think 201. So really small. But after about 8 months, the sports guy left and they knew that I was super interested in sports and they gave me that position. But after about a year, almost 2 years there, I had kind of lost my passion for TV. And just the environment that I was in and all of that just kind of was wearing down on me. And the whole reason I got into all of this was because I wanted to love what I did every day when I woke up, and I wasn't wasn't loving it anymore. So I kind of had like a come to Jesus moment where I was like, okay, if you're going to change career paths, you need to probably do it like soon. Because I was going to be completely like changing everything that I had worked for the last 4, 5, 6 years. So I got in touch with a college professor, and she was like, I have a friend, like, why don't you just talk to him and just see what he has to say. So long story short, ended up taking a news producer position in Birmingham, Alabama. So it gave me the opportunity to go back to Alabama, but I wasn't doing necessarily what I thought I wanted to do, which was a really eye-opening experience. I tell people that going there is why I got back into sports. And it was super helpful for me because I got to do a job that has essentially made me a better producer when I'm producing my shows now. But it also made me realize the importance of being close to family. So, I mean, I had always said, I'm just going to move away forever and never come back. But it was kind of cool to be within an hour of my parents again after living 12 hours away from them. And I met some of my closest friends, and that year and a half in Birmingham was, I think, what I needed to kind of spark the fire back into the passion that I wanted to go into work with every day. So because of that, I basically started over because I've been off air for like a year and a half. So all my tape and stuff was over a year old. So I just started sending it out to small stations again and thought, well, you're just going to have to, grind it out again. Even though I was going to be a lot older than most of the people that were going to be taking these jobs in these starter markets. And then Lima, Ohio called. And it's funny because my dad is actually a University of Dayton grad. So I grew up a Flyer fan, grew up going to the arena. My uncle lived there until he passed away a few years ago. So Dayton and Ohio wasn't super unfamiliar to me. And my dad's college roommate is actually from Lima. So it's kind of a weird turn of events for all that to happen. I now cover the school of my dad's college roommate that he went to when he was in high school. So it's super funny. But I didn't really know what to expect when I got here. I knew I was going to be, 26 years old and older than most of the people in the entire station, other than, the ones who had been there most of their career. I didn't really know what to expect, but I knew if I wanted to do this as a career, I had to basically start over again. And I tell people all the time that it was the best decision I've ever made. Because this part of the country in this pocket, which I'm sure you got to see at times, people in Alabama love sports, but the love for high school sports around here is something that I've never experienced. And the level of competition and the level of success that I cover is something that I've never experienced in any other place that I've experienced. It worked.
When you look at Lima, and obviously 2020 has been very different. When you first started up there, the high school sports, the way it was covered was very different. Now here in Virginia, we haven't had high school sports the same way. There's no high school football. That's not going to happen until the spring. So what's it been like in Ohio covering high school football and all these other sports during a pandemic? I know it's very different.
Yeah. So you rewind to March. We actually so when everything got canceled, like most states, they had to stop high school sports. I was actually leaving my apartment, headed to Columbus to cover the state semifinals for girls basketball. When I got an email from the OHSAA that said, hey, this is canceled. And I was kind of like, my first inkling was like, if they cancel this, there's no way we're going to ever make these up, because they play them at the Schottenstein Center, which is where Ohio State plays basketball, and it's a long-standing contract that they do all this. I was just like, there's no way they're going to figure out how to do this before May, even not knowing how long the pandemic was going to happen. So I think my initial reaction was just, I was so heartbroken because we still had so many teams in all four. We have 4 basketball divisions here in Alabama, and we had, I think, so the boys play a week behind. We had 2 girls teams, 3 girls teams vying for state titles, 1 for their 3rd straight. And we had, I think by my count, 5 or 6 boys basketball teams still left. We likely could have had a state. I mean, it was very possible that we could have had a state champ in all 4 divisions from our area, which is insane. And 2 undefeated teams. I mean, it was just all this, I kind of get into all that history and all these stats and, how long it's been or their first one or whatever. And we had all these records that could have been broken. And so I think my first thing was just, well, how do we, I feel this way about this. I can't imagine what these kids feel, what these coaches feel. So our initial reaction was to tell the stories of these kids who weren't going to get to finish, many of them seniors. And I don't think that we knew that we weren't going to get spring. I think we thought maybe, okay, well, by the time baseball and stuff rolls around, we'll have figured all this out. But it was just, we had to take sports one day at a time, which we're not very good at. We're normally all about trying to at least plan the week out. And I have to, applaud my station and my bosses because they came to us and they were like, look, just fill what you can, do what you can. But, we know that you guys can figure it out. So, let's get creative. So we all kind of like put on our thinking caps and there wasn't actual live sports for us to cover, but there's so much sports history here. There's so many people that have poured their lives into athletics here in this area. And we thought, okay, well, we're always trying to zoom through everything. We're always like moving 100 miles a minute and like cramming as much into our short little sports block as we can. Now we have all this time that maybe we can start covering some of the things the stories that we never have quote unquote time to tell because there's, things that get deemed more important. So we started doing long form things on former coaches, guys that, and coaches that had, made an impact on this community. And I didn't know how it was going to turn out because I didn't know if people were going to appreciate it or they would be like, we would just rather not see anything. But the community really loved it and they got to hear, a lot of, people our parents' age got to kind of reminisce on these state runs that they got to go on and coaches that were, from this area that, went on state runs who now coach. It was kind of cool just to be able to tell those stories. So whereas it was obviously bad. I mean, it was, sad that these kids weren't getting to experience the here and now. We got an opportunity as a sports department to kind of flip the script and do some things that we don't normally get to do and tell some stories that we don't normally get to tell. So I think that was something positive that we were able to bring out of it. As the summer rolled on, obviously we just were still taking things one day at a time because we didn't know how it was going to happen, how the fall was going to go, if we were even going to get it. Because so many states like yours were moving things, just going ahead and punting and moving it to the spring. And Ohio came out like late July and said that they were going to play all the contact sports. And that everyone was going to basically play a normal schedule except for football. They knocked the regular season down to 6 games from 10, and that everyone would make the playoffs. If you get eliminated from the playoffs, you can still play 4 more games, so you can get 10 games in there. So I think, I guess commend the state of Ohio for trying. And trying to make it where it was somewhat equal so that if there was an outbreak in the regular season, everyone could still have a chance to extend their season. But it's been interesting. I think the kids were just excited for the opportunity to play. And we do a Countdown the Kickoff series every summer where we visit most of the teams that we cover and kind of catch people up to speed on who they lost and who they got back and all that kind of stuff. And the overarching theme from every coach and every player was, I think after all of this, we just appreciate being out here more than we ever have.
It's been nice to see high school football actually taking place there, and they're learning like everybody else is as we go along, like the NFL is, like college football is. And another good reason why I was to talk to you this week specifically is because we know some of those other football conferences have started play already, but the Big Ten is gearing up to finally start playing. It's, you're from Alabama. You've
Mhm.
seen what college football means. And obviously it's, Ohio's pretty much the same, right? Everybody loves Ohio State. They love the Big Ten. So first off, just how excited are you for college football to come back there in Ohio, where you've been watching it from afar as the other states? I know like Notre Dame's playing next door, other schools have been playing, but now the Buckeyes are getting ready to kick off.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I you get immersed into the culture when you're here because you meet people from around. So everyone loves to rag on me because I'm from Alabama, and so it's kind of, my boss is an Ohio State grad, so that's always a funny thing. But I think it is exciting. I think that it would have been a disservice to college football if everyone didn't get the opportunity to play. I was kind of I didn't really know what the best procedure would have been, but I would have hated to have seen some of them play and not the rest of them. I was kind of an all or nothing person. Like, we all either need to play or we all need to not play. So I'm glad that everyone's getting the opportunity. And I think people are just excited. I know the buzz has been really cool to kind of see everyone, not only I feel like the excitement for this game, even though it's Nebraska on Saturday, that Ohio State should handle with ease. I think people are just so pumped for it. So it's really exciting. It'll be interesting to see how those teams add themselves into the mix. Normally, we don't really we kind of come in with that preseason ranking, and we're like, all right, well, we'll know pretty quickly where these teams fall in, like in the pecking order. But now you've got these conferences that already have games under the belt, like the SEC, who have essentially sort of kind of beat up on each other. So I think seeing what the Big Ten does will give us a better, landscape of what this football season is going to be like, as far as talent wise, and who's going to be up there for a shot at a title. It's been cool to, that Ohio State's been really good about doing Zoom meetings and Zoom calls leading up, because they're not going to be doing pressers on campus and all that kind of stuff. So we've got to hear from, Justin Fields and Coach Day a lot. And it should be another exciting year for them. Barring any just hiccups or anything, I mean, I think they should be vying for another title. I think they're right up there. So.
Yeah, one of my favorite things when I moved to Alabama even was just learning the culture and just kind of what college football was like in a different capacity, because I'm from outside DC, and it's a professional sports town, right? The University of Maryland's nearby, but pro sports in those bigger cities are kind of what the focus is. Now, I went to Old Dominion University. They got football eventually when I was there, and now they're in Conference USA, but it's at a completely different level. I didn't grow up going to University of Virginia games or West Virginia or Virginia Tech. Once I got to Alabama, I was like, holy cow, this is incredible. Going to Auburn. I know you might not like Auburn as much. You're going to Tuscaloosa, but it was just really cool to be there in those games and those situations, and to see that firsthand. And then I got to Ohio, and I got to see how Ohio State and Michigan was. I'm like, my goodness, this is the best of the best all over. Comparing the Big Ten and the SEC and all these conferences, it's hard to do. There's different, the climate's different. They play different kind of styles of football. But how much fun is it for you to kind of be entrenched in a different part? I know you're in Missouri before as well, but to kind of see what those other conferences are like firsthand in a way you maybe didn't get to see growing up.
Yeah, I think the thing I get asked that a lot, actually. How different is college football around here than it is at home? And I'm like, well, it's not that different. I think that's what I learned, was that it really isn't that different. While, yes, Ohio State sometimes plays in the snow, they also don't play in, the heat in November. I remember Alabama always plays LSU the first week of November, and I remember going to that game as a student in short sleeves. So there's give and take there at any given year. But I think the main thing that I've learned is there isn't that much different between the SEC and the Big Ten. I know those are kind of, at least over the last decade, have kind of been the two conferences that everyone's kind of turned to, because they've been the ones that have been in contention for the most part. And I think the only thing that makes it different is that on Sundays here, you've got Bengals and Browns, and people love both those teams, despite maybe not having much success. They still are so loyal. I always tell people at home, like, Sunday's our day to recover because we've watched football all day on Saturday. And whereas, people do that here, they also turn it again on Sunday. Not that there aren't NFL fans in Alabama. There are, and people do have their teams. But it's not as big of a social gathering where I'm from or where I grew up as it is here.
Do you have any favorite memories, either as like a broadcaster, like some cool games you've gotten to cover, or just even back in your days at Alabama as a student? Like, I know those are always those things. I think for all of us, it's like, that's why, we love what we do so much, just as these memories just kind of stay with us for so long. So do you have any of those?
Yeah, I think my first one came when I was in Missouri. There's a small D2 college there that played in the GLVC. Their basketball program got to go to, and the way that, for people who aren't familiar, the way that D2 does their like NCAA tournament, you basically go play at like a regional site, and you have to win 2 games at a regional site, and then you go to another site to play like the next round. So that basketball team made the NCAA tournament for like the first time in 12 years. And I got to go cover that. And while it wasn't, it wasn't on the scale of going to cover the Sweet 16 or whatever at a big arena, I went down to Louisville and got to cover history. And I mentioned before, I kind of geek out on stats and history and people making history and seeing things like that, because I think, you watch ESPN or whatever network, and we're always throwing it back. Remember that time that so-and-so did so-and-so, and, somebody was there to capture that on video. And I feel like that's kind of like my place in history, is to help, tell those stories. So to get to do that was kind of my first thing that I was like, wow, like this hasn't happened in 12 years. And now it kind of started a run. I still keep up with them a little bit, and, they've been successful since then. And then I don't think it didn't really hit me again until I got up here. I've mentioned it before. The people here, they don't just love high school football. They love high school volleyball, high school cross country. I mean, It does not matter what sport it is. I mean, we cover bowling. We have really good high school bowling teams that win state titles in our area. And I mean, there's no reason we can't go cover them, just like we cover a football team. And so I remember there was a volleyball regional semifinal game. So like they were a win away from going to state, or 2 wins, I guess, away from going to state. And the thing that's different to me about Ohio are the conferences. We don't have conferences in Alabama for high schools, obviously, as you remember. You're like told a region that you play in, and you just play those teams. So it's kind of cool that there are conferences here in Ohio, just kind of like the conferences that happen in, college football or whatnot. So it's a really big deal to like win your conference, and there's obviously rivalries within those conferences and whatnot. But there's a conference in Ohio full of small schools. It's called the Midwest Athletic Conference, so the MAC, but not the MAC that most people know about. But they are exceptionally good at everything. I mean, it's absolutely insane. I would have to go back and count again, but after being here a year, I think I had seen them win. It was close to double-digit state titles between all the sports that I had covered in the year that I had been here. And I'm like, my high school hasn't won a state championship in like anything. So what? You guys are winning state championships every year. You're going for 3-peats. Like it didn't make any sense to me. But it so happened that there was a regional semifinal game where 2 MAC teams ended up meeting back in that bracket. And they always play at neutral sites. So they'll, like you probably remember, a random high school will volunteer to host, and, the 2 teams will come there. So there's a little town next to Lima called Elida, and they have a pretty big basketball like facility. It's called the Field House. It's like separated from the school. And I walked in there for this regional semifinal volleyball game that like shouldn't be that big of a deal. They're still 3-4 wins away from us, playing for a state title. I walk in there and you can't move. There are people, there had to have been 2,000 people in there. And I'm like, this is a regional semifinal volleyball game. People from other MAC schools had come that weren't playing, had come to like watch the volleyball match. And I was like, I couldn't. And that's when I realized this is a big deal. And it's a big deal everywhere, but I always, just because of the success that the MAC has had, and it's just a bunch of small communities down between Lima and Dayton that, they're the ones who are, this year playing for a state record 12th state title. And I mean, the New York Times came and wrote an article on their football team last year. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know. And just getting to be a part of their history, I'm a small part. I'm not like, in no way am I a part, but just to be there to watch them do all these things and experience kind of, a little taste of what they experience. It's just been really cool. And I think that's just electrified my love for sports. You don't have to be in New York or LA to make a difference and to be successful. I think so many people in this business think, well, I have to make it to a sports network or I'm not doing, like, I didn't make it. And there's so much push to quote unquote make it. I think, well, for me, I got into this to tell people stories and to, quote unquote, make a difference, I guess, in the small way that I can do it by being at a high school basketball game on a Saturday night or whatever. And so if I can put a kid on TV and his grandma can see it, I mean, that means something to me.
There's two different types of people in TV. Those that enjoy the product of television. And as you said, those enjoy the chance to just be on television. The product is what you described, right? You're on the sidelines when it's pouring rain. You're driving 3 hours if you have to, and then all the way back if you have to. And you're also putting in those extra hours and working on those holidays. And then the people that don't enjoy the product, they're probably taking all those holidays off. They're working their 8 hours and they're getting out the door and they're taking those lunch breaks, which I never really knew those existed sometimes.
I've gotten really good at eating various things in my car. So I live out of a car, I feel like, most days, because you're driving from one game to the next game to the next game, and somehow you have to figure out how to eat in there. But you got really good at like finding decent things to eat at gas stations, because sometimes in these small towns there's not a McDonald's, so you kind of have to get creative.
I think I knew where almost all of the coffee shops were, because there might be like, even if it was 8 o'clock at night, I was like, I need some caffeine because I got to be up for another 4 hours. And then tomorrow I've got to wake up at 5 a.m. to do something else. So you gotta do all those different things. But so you're obviously like me, you interview a lot of people for a living. So I want to flip the script right now with you. I don't know if you had any questions that you've been wanting to ask me, but I always enjoy having conversations with people. So I've asked you a little bit about you, or is there anything about me that you're like, Kirk, why don't I know this yet? So I'm going to ask you right now.
Yeah, well, I think I know a lot about what you did in Alabama, because I obviously interned at stations in Alabama that, you guys all kind of did the same thing. But I guess what was I'm kind of going to ask you to say like similar question to me. You've covered some national titles and some SEC titles and all that kind of stuff. But besides all of that, or beyond all of that, is there any sports moment that you got to be there for that you kind of dub as the one that you'll probably always remember?
Well, I'll mention this again. I mentioned this on the last podcast with Trey Wilson, because I know you like the Cubs, right? Am I correct there? So I was there in 2016 when they beat the Indians in Cleveland. So just as a baseball fan, that was a really incredible moment. Obviously, won't get too deep into it, but once again, just to be there for the Cubs to win the World Series, that was really awesome. But yeah, just kind of pulling back on different things. I mean, there aren't too many like championship teams, I guess, I would have covered, especially besides like, when Alabama and Auburn were doing their thing and having those successes. I really enjoyed being at the Ohio State-Michigan game a few years back when it was the overtime win, where I think Ohio State got that first down, right? That Harbaugh was like, no, they did not get that first down. So that was a really cool moment. to be there in Ohio State and then watch them. There's a cool shot of me on the sidelines with my camera and the guy scoring right in front of me, which was pretty awesome. So to be obviously seeing Alabama and Auburn up close like I did, and those super intense games that went down to the wire, to then also have another one like that go on at Ohio State, Michigan, was like, I was like, hey, it's really hard to get better than this. And then I'd say one of the other things will probably be when I was in Ohio, I got there not too long after LeBron came back. So to be there for a couple of years of getting to go to the NBA finals. And I was there the first year when Golden State won in Cleveland. I wasn't, in California when the Cavs won, but just kind of those moments, those memories were pretty cool. But heck, even seeing Bowling Green win a MAC championship in Detroit, that was awesome. Those different things, all the action on, Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights, Thursday nights, whatever those games were, whenever ESPN was like, we'll put you on national TV. And they were like, give us all the money. We're going to do the exact same thing. So those are cool moments. Besides, the high school ones, there's just so many of them over the years, to pinpoint all the different championships, and even the colleges too. Those, you kind of discussed those smaller colleges. I think I covered it. NAIA, softball champion, a JUCO baseball champion, all those cool things. And hockey in Ohio is pretty fun too. I'm a big hockey fan.
Favorite city/event that you've covered?
I'll actually just, you always remember your first, right? I'll go with the national championship game, Alabama Notre Dame, just being able to go to Miami. That was my first big trip, in TV. So I think just that kind of experience, and you see everything in a different capacity, because you already know what the work is like, but you don't really understand what it's like, right? Until you go like on location somewhere, you travel and you're setting up shop completely in a different part of the country from where you're based out of. So I think, anytime you get a chance to go to Miami, right, it's never going to be a bad time. So being able to do that was pretty cool. So I would say that's probably my favorite. I've had a lot of fun trips, but I'll, at least with the first time being able to do something like that, and then being like, wow, this is pretty cool. All these people up here are paying a ton of money to be at this game, and I'm getting paid to be here and sit in the press box and go on the field afterwards. So you can't really get too angry about that. A huge thank you to Katie for joining me on this episode of the podcast. And if you haven't already, please make sure to give her a follow on social media. You can find that information in the description below. Until next time, I'll see you on Kirkin Out.